On March 5th, 1870, Sheriff Ephraim Dodd stepped into the Wyant farmhouse off Brush Valley Road in Center County, Pennsylvania, where Mercy Wyant had delivered at dawn under the hands of township midwife Hester Beam, while her brother, Orrin Wyant, paced the kitchen, and Dr. Calder Imlay unpacked a portfolio of teratology plates fastened with 4 brass tacks. The orphan's court seat at Belafonte sat 11 miles downslope, a distance the sheriff measured with his thumb on a township map tacked to the wall near the door latch. Reverend Obadiah Rule lingered on the porch steps, hat clasped, saying nothing until someone told him to say something. Drop your city and the exact time on your clock in the comments. One question drives everything that follows. How many hands worked to hide whose child lay in that crib? Numbers hold this room like nails. 17 leaves stood missing from the family Bible, excised clean at the stub. 3 signature lines on Hester Beam's ledger page lay blank where fathers usually write their names. 4 brass tacks kept Dr. Imlay's plates square. And the ribbon threaded through the christening cap measured 7 inches from needle hole to needle hole when Sheriff Dodd stretched it across his palm. The room smelled like winter apples and lamp oil. Mercy lay white-faced under a quilt with 9 patch blocks, the corner where she had bitten showing a crescent of blood no bigger than a shirt button. She had the look of someone counting breaths. Hester Beam had set the infant in a wooden crib with a cotton pad and draped a square of muslin over the face the way women do when a face asks questions you cannot answer. Orrin Wyant stood in the doorway chewing at the cuticle of one thumb, until the skin went raw. The nail bed had 3 ragged nicks a 1/4 inch apart. Twice he looked toward the stove as if the stove could tell him what to think. Dodd wrote, "Orrin, brother, informant," in a hand that refused to shake. Doctor. Imlay set his caliper down and opened the portfolio secured by those 4 brass tacks. The top plate showed a sketched profile of a fetal head. The next, a frontal diagram with circles where eyes should be. In the margin of one, he had written a line before breakfast. Malformation consistent with close kin. He wrote small, to save ink, and wrote plain to save time. Hester Beam's ledger lay on the washstand by a blue basin with a hairline crack. The ledger page for this house held 1 neat line for Mercy's name, one for the hour the pains began, one for the birth. The line marked Father ran to the edge and dropped into white. 2 more lines below, Witness, Witness, carried nothing. 3 blanks where 3 hands should have been. Simeon Klein, the township clerk, came in with a satchel of forms and a pen with a split nib. He pulled his stool close to the table where the Bible ought to sit during entries and found only a rectangle of dust. He lifted the tablecloth and saw the wood under it had a clean rectangle where the book had rested for years. Someone had removed it within the day. Dodd asked for the Bible, and Orrin fetched it from a trunk that had brass corners, 2 of which had gone green. The book opened to family pages relieved of entries. 17 stubs remained where leaves had been cut near the spine with a knife so sharp no fuzz lifted. The narrow cuts left a regular row of slivers like corn silk. Reverend Rule touched the paper with 1 finger and drew back as if heat rose from it. He said the word no one liked to hear because it carries into court. Consanguinity. Dodd set the Bible down with its spine aligned to the table's edge and wrote 17 leaves excised without looking at Orrin. Mercy spoke once and only once. "Don't put him in the book," she said, and turned her face to the wall. Hester set the muslin more squarely over the infant's mouth and brow and smoothed it until no shadow rose where a nose would have cast a line. Out in the yard, Prudence, Haldeman, who lived at the bend, stood with her shawl crossed tight and told Dodd what she had been seeing without wanting to see it. 3 evenings running, lights moved in the Wyant hayloft when men were not threshing. 1 light low, 1 higher, 1 halfway like a watch. She had found, under the fence stile, a ribbon scrap from a cap, 7 inches end to end, stiff with milk. She kept it in a pocket and brought it out flat as a snake. The room smelled like winter apples and lamp oil. Hester lifted the muslin, once, to let Dr. Imlay do what a doctor must. He slid his caliper from temple to temple. He set a flexible rule from brow to lip. He wrote lengths, 3 1/8, 1 7/16, and kept his jaw tight. Then he set the muslin back as carefully as if wind could dislodge it. To speak plain, the infant had no eyes. The infant had no nose. The upper lip had a median notch you could hide with a thumb. The ears lay low and soft, as if late to rise. Dr. Imlay did not snap a jar. Shut. He did not cut. He did not keep anything. He kept numbers. Klein asked for names. Hester said Wyant, and Klein wrote it. She said Mercy, and Klein wrote it. He said Father, and Mercy closed her eyes and let 1 tear run into her hair. Orrin looked at the ledger and did not lift the pen. Klein set the pen down and folded his hands, because sometimes folding is the only honest act in reach. Dodd measured the ribbon through the eyelets of the cap, 7 inches, and wrote 7 in. He set the cap on the table with the seam running north-south. He counted stitches, where an experienced hand had shortened the crown for a smaller head, 11 small tacks at the back. He noted the neatness without praise. Reverend Rule cleared his throat and tried to lift a hymn that would fit a room with numbers in it. He settled instead for a line under his breath that a man uses when naming sins he does not want to name, in the presence of the people who made them. He looked at Orrin, and then at Mercy, and then at the wall, where the peg rail held a child's shirt with one missing button. Prudence Haldeman spoke of what she'd heard weeks before at the spring house. Voices not raised, a man and a woman saying, "Keep," "quiet," and "end." Numbers stick in a witness's head even when words don't. She counted 3 nights, 2 voices, 1 pause in the stream of village talk where everyone turned their heads the same direction and then turned them back. Klein walked the 4 corners of the kitchen and looked again for the Bible leaves in some foolish hope. He checked the stove bin and the wood box. He looked under the bed where balls of old thread collect. He did not find the leaves. He found a scalpel like the kind a doctor uses, blade wiped, handle warm from a hand not long gone. Dr. Imlay said, "The line of physician says, when the line is the truth and nothing more, malformation consistent with close kin." He spoke it to the ledger and not to a person. Hester stood square, her hands at her apron corners, and did not flinch. Dodd asked for the orphans' court petition that people had whispered about since winter. Simeon Klein said the petition existed under seal in Belafonte and had traveled back once for service and then gone up again under a paper ribbon. The phrase he remembered from the magistrate's hand was consanguinity within the 2nd degree. He remembered because it is not a phrase a man forgets even if he wants to. 11 miles separate a farmhouse and a court in a way that grows longer when the road climbs. Dodd took his hat and his notebook and his temper and went down off Brush Valley before noon. He left Hargrove, Deputy Amos Hargrove, whose name had not been spoken until he stepped from behind the door, at the Wyant porch with instructions to keep the portfolio closed and the Bible on the table. The first anchor scene belongs to a place where no one walked unless they had to, the eaves above the summer kitchen. Dodd returned near evening with Nathan Pierce, the orphans' court prothonotary, and Magistrate Rufus Yerkes, who wore his coat as if he had fallen into it and refused to drown. Hargrove fetched a ladder. Dodd went up first, knees scuffing lint. On the rungs, splinters working into his palm. The heat under the roof had a sweetness you catch only in houses that keep apples into spring. It slicked the lips and made the throat want water. He set his shoulder to a low door a child could crawl through, but a man must humble himself to enter. Inside, dust lay like frost. A chest stood black with a crack down its lid. The hasp took 2 tries. Inside lay the family Bible, the christening cap boxed in tissue, and a wrapped stack of paper the size of leaves bound in twine. Dodd unwrapped the stack and found the 17 excised family pages, the inner margins still clean. From their safe place in the Bible, entries scraped out where someone had tried to make names turn into blank. The strokes of the knife had left runnels you could feel with a fingertip. The room smelled like winter apples and lamp oil. He called down for gloves. Hargrove passed up 2 pairs, taken from the doctor's satchel because the house had none. Dodd lifted 1 leaf and held it to light. The torn-off names left a ghost where ink had sunk into fibers. If you squinted, you could see the first letter of M and the tail of a Y. He lowered the leaf and slid it into the Bible to feel the fit, and the fit held spine to spine, stub to stub. Magistrate Yerkes, who had only climbed halfway and crouched sweating, said the one line that mattered from a judge's mouth when paper met paper. "We will mark this chain." He took a pencil and wrote a small dot on the back of each found page, 11 dots in the first bundle, 6 in the second, and wrote his initials beside the last. He was not a man for flourishes. He was a man for dots. Pierce, who had left his own court shelves to see why rumors smell more like truth after you open a trunk, reached to lift the cap. The 7-inch ribbon slid across his knuckles. He laid the cap on the Bible where the gap ran and covered one gap with the other. The juxtaposition made Dodd angry in a way a sheriff cannot show in a house. He breathed through his nose. Back downstairs, under the eaves dust, Hester Beam took one look at the stack and said, "Those are not ash yet." She said it like a woman who has burned more paper than she tells, and knows the way ash takes a line in a pan. Mercy turned her face into the quilt and did not watch. Dodd tied the leaves again and sealed them in canvas with a strip of wax that had once sealed a jar of preserves. Cherry, you could smell the faint sugar. He pressed his ring into the wax for a seal because the court's stamp sat 11 miles away. It would have to do. Prudence Haldeman stayed as the evening drew and watched the candles in the house with country eyes. She said later that light on paper has a color that makes guilt look yellow. She took her shawl tighter around her shoulders and waited to see if Orrin would stay at the table or step into the yard to breathe like a free man. He did not leave the door. The second anchor scene belongs to distance and repetition. 2 nights later, at the stretch when a farm sleeps and watches, Prudence stood at her fence and watched lanterns in the Wyant barn move in a pattern, low, mid, low, stop, that repeated 3 times. She listened for hoof stamp or milk spill, and heard none. She saw Orrin's shape pass behind one window and Mercy's shadow cross the kitchen wall and then sit. She kept her eyes on the lane. A buggy with 1 horse and 1 bench came and went without a wheel squeak, grease fresh on the axles. The driver wore his hat low. He passed between the white oaks and did not look up. When he had gone, Prudence walked the margin where wheels flattened grass and found in the wheel track a black button with a shank. The button matched one missing from the child's shirt on the peg in the Wyant kitchen. She put the button in her apron and counted her steps home. 11 from the stile to the porch, 11 from the porch to the table. She laid the button by the cap and the muslin and felt the numbers start to make a shape like a net. The room smelled like winter apples and lamp oil. Dodd delivered the sealed canvas to Belafonte the next afternoon. Pierce took it into a vault with a door that fit, like a stopper. Magistrate Yerkes unknotted the string and wrote a note on the back of his hand because he had mislaid his paper. Received 17 leaves. He said the court would set a day to open the petition under seal in the presence of counsel. And clerk. Hesterbeam walked home and, in her own kitchen, opened her ledger to the page with 3 blanks. She took her pencil and held it over the father line without touching paper. She closed the book and slid it under her stove slate. She was not yet ready to make a mark she could not unmake by heat. Dr. Imlay put his plate portfolio in his bag and pressed the 4 brass tacks flat with the back of his fingernail. He wrote a letter to Dr. Jacob K. Moore in Harrisburg about the case and did not mail it, because a letter like that can rot a man's life. He put the letter under the plates and pushed the tacks once more. Reverend Rule wrote a sermon about sins of ignorance and burned it in the yard before Sunday because the sermon looked like a cowardly way to talk to the living. He preached on psalm numbers instead and watched the back pew where Mercy had sat before her belly. Came, and he did not watch it long because a pastor learns to watch the doorframe when the back pew makes his stomach turn. Simeon Klein posted a notice of a special session at the township hall, a room with plank benches and a table set with a kerosene lamp, whose shade had a crack you could not see unless the light was wrong. He set the hour by the bell from the ironworks. 1 strike at the half and a heavy blow at the hour he marked. On the chalkboard. He wrote the hour in chalk and wiped it off with his cuff mid-stroke. He had not decided whether to have a public scene. The county decided for him. The third anchor scene belongs to paper in motion and a hand that takes what it should not. When the Orphans' Court met, on November 8th, 1873, a cold day that made the courthouse stove reek, Pierce brought out the canvas packet and cut the wax with a knife his children used to whittle sticks. He laid the 17 leaves on the green, felt and called Magistrate Yerkes to sit. Sheriff Dodd stood, Dr. Imlay stood, Hester Beam had come in her second-best dress, Orrin had shaved. Yerkes broke the belly of the seal on the petition. Inside, the handwriting went tight at the edges where men learn to write small when fear sits in a room. The phrase ran in the magistrate's own earlier hand, smoother then than it was now, consanguinity within the 2nd degree. Beneath it, an order to seal. Beneath that, a direction to the sheriff. To serve. Beneath that, a note that service had been attempted and returned. Pierce read aloud the physician's certificate attached to the petition, Dr. Imlay's words cold from 2 years ago. Malformation consistent with close kin. He did not read the measurements. He read the line and let the line stand like a fence post in frozen ground. Yerkes turned the family leaves one by one, counting aloud. 11, 12, 13, and stopped at 13 because the last 4 lay. Together, he lifted the top of the last 4, and let his breath out the way a man breathes when he sets a sack down after 2 flights. Ink had been scraped, not blotted. Names had been taken out with a knife. The knife had left a fine trench. Dodd leaned forward to see if a letter could be recovered by raking light. He bent the leaf and looked at the indentations. He saw the bottom of an R like the hook at the end of a fish. He saw the tail of an H. He saw nothing that you could swear to. He set the leaf down and looked at the cap ribbon which he had brought in a paper twist from Prudence's apron. The clerk turned to fetch the cap from his drawer, the christening cap with the 7-inch ribbon, and found the drawer empty. He turned another drawer and found nothing. He looked at Dodd, and Dodd looked at the door. Someone had lifted the cap from the clerk's desk in the minute the court stood to let an old man sit. The cap had evaporated into the house the way warm breath leaves glass. Pierce ran his hand under the green felt lip and felt only crumbs. He did not look at Orrin. He looked at the empty space the cap had left. He wrote, "Cap absent," on a scrap the size of a ticket you'd pin on a parcel, and that scrap later fell into the packet like it belonged there. The room smelled like winter apples and lamp oil. The fourth anchor scene, the public one, sat in the township hall because no one wanted to fit a crowd into a courtroom again. The hour they set, 2 in the afternoon, fell after dinner so men could sit without worrying their stomachs. The one time we will speak a clock. Dodd carried 6 objects to the table and set them in a row the way a mason lays bricks to make. A wall hold. First, the family Bible, its stub forest for 17 leaves. Second, Hester Beam's ledger open to the page where 3 lines lay blank. Third, the sealed petition from Orphan's Court with the magistrate's phrase on the top line. Fourth, Dr. Imlay's plate portfolio with its 4 brass tacks closed tight. Fifth, Sheriff Dodd's caliper, heavy, brass, cold. Sixth, the township map pinned to a board with 11 miles scratched between the Wyant farm and Bellefonte in a path that laid the road bare. Reverend Rule stood near the back, willing himself to hold his tongue. Simeon Klein sat at the edge of the table, biting his own lip as if that act would keep him from moving his hand. Magistrate Yerkes sat with his hat on his knees and his pencil in his breast pocket, where it pressed a mark on his shirt he would later see and forget to wash. Dodd's voice did not rise. It ran. He touched the Bible's spine and said, 17 leaves. He touched Hester's ledger and said, 3 blanks. He tapped the portfolio and said, 4 tacks. He rested the caliper on his palm and said, 1 plane. He tapped the map and said, 11 miles. He ended at the petition and read the phrase aloud so it would stop living under paper, consanguinity within the 2nd degree. Dr. Imlay did not hold up a plate. He opened the portfolio 1 inch and drew out the sheet that held his note in the margin, the one that said the thing a man keeps in the corner because it makes rooms colder. Malformation consistent with closekin. He laid the plate down and slid it back under the tacks. He did not let anyone touch it. Hester Beam put her finger to the line in her ledger and did not press. "This line belongs to the father," she said, a sentence that did not carry heat until it reached ears that needed to burn. She lifted her finger and left no graphite. Orrin swallowed hard. Prudence Haldeman stepped forward and set the 7-inch ribbon scrap on the table, not the whole cap, just the piece that had fallen under her fence stile earlier in the week. "Found on the path," she said. She had put a single stitch at one end to keep the cut from running. The stitch looked like an ash line. Then, one person who was not supposed to speak spoke in the way that sobers rooms. Nathan Pierce, a clerk, not a deacon, said one sentence that froze the benches. "You do not erase a child from a page by scraping a leaf." He did not raise his chin. He did not look at Orrin or Mercy. He looked at the ledger and the Bible, and the petition, as if paper had feelings. Silence made wood tick. The stove popped like a knuckle. Reverend Rule did not offer a prayer because he understood numbers pray their own prayers. Dodd closed the Bible and pressed his palm to the cover as if to hold the contents from spilling. After the hall emptied, Yerkes signed a writ for custody of the Bible leaves and the ledger page for copying. He handed the writ to Dodd, and Dodd handed it to Pierce because the court and the township shared hands when the county needed both. Hargrove carried the portfolio in his crook the way a man carries a child when the child sleeps, and you will not wake him for anything. Back at the Wyant house, Mercy sat up and buttoned her dress to the throat. She asked for a basin and a cloth in a minute. Hester left the room and stood with her hands at her sides until Mercy folded the cloth and set it in the basin. Hester took the basin and washed it with lye and water and set it upside down on the sill. Orrin cut wood until the axe head came loose from the handle. He set the head on the stump and looked at the sky like a boy. He picked up the head and placed it back on the handle. Slow, a man again, and took the handle to the creek to swell. Dodd returned to Bellefonte with his box. He placed the Bible leaves in the vault beside the petition sleeve and wrote on the back of the canvas wrapper, 17 placed, November 8th, 1873. He placed the ledger page under a clean sheet of mica and traced the lines without touching them. He closed the vault. The winter set in and carried talk less far because snow swallows sound. Hester delivered 3 more births, one to a family that paid her in a piece of a side of pork. She salted herself. Dr. Imlay pulled a tooth and set 2 bones from a fall and listened each time for what the house would not say out loud. Simeon. Klein wrote mislaid in a margin where he meant stolen and refused to cross it out. Prudence Haldeman found the missing cap 4 fence posts down in a drift where the wind made drifts stand. She brought it to Hester, who kept it in a flour tin under her stove slate where her ledger lay. Hester measured the ribbon again, 7 inches, and put a slip in the tin that read 7 cap. She was a woman who did not trust memory. alone. Reverend Rule wrote a letter he did not send to a minister he had known in his youth, asking what the wages of silence were. He tucked the letter in the back of his Bible under a line from a prophet he had never preached, because some lines make thieves of men when they speak them out loud. Magistrate Yerkes signed 2 more petitions that winter and 1 writ of guardianship. His pencil wore to a nub. He sharpened it with a knife with a horn handle that had belonged to his father, who had signed for pavers and timber 40 years ago when the court lived in a room with a dirt floor. Dr. Imlay carried his portfolio to Harrisburg once the thaw softened the ruts. He showed the plate with his margin note to a man he respected who said nothing and drank his tea and then said, "There are families in valleys." Neither man needed the rest of the sentence. Imlay took back his portfolio and pressed the tacks with his nail until they bit. Hester took the ledger page to Bellefonte for copying when the roads could be traveled with a horse that had not eaten a oat since Christmas. The clerk set the page under glass and traced it onto foolscap. He left the 3 blanks blank. He handed Hester a copy, and she put it behind the stove slate as if paper could pick up warmth. Sheriff Dodd kept the caliper on his desk as a weight to keep letters from sliding. He weighed 1 letter addressed to the Attorney General in Harrisburg, and let it lie. He weighed a 2nd letter addressed to no one and burned it. The caliper sat cool on the paper the way brass does in rooms where feelings run hot. The room smelled like winter apples and lamp oil. Spring threw water down the mountain in ropes and cleaned the road ditches of straw. Orrin took a job hauling bark to a tannery 11 miles away, and grunted at men who did not need to know his name. Mercy walked to her mother's grave and pressed the cap in the wet grass, then took the cap back, because you do not leave a thing at a place where men step without looking where they step. Prudence Haldeman kept the black button on her sill, until the sun bleached it to a dull widow's brown. She dropped it then into a jar with other found things: bent nails, a coin with a hole punched, a lock of hair that had wrapped around a comb tooth, a key with no door. She wrote numbers on slips and slid them into the jar as if order could make a life less like gravel. Simeon Klein filed the copied ledger page in a drawer and wrote a label for the drawer that said, "Births, 1870, and slid the drawer shut with more force than it needed. He turned the key. The key stayed in the lock. Later that year, someone found the key in a coal scuttle and could not say how it had gone there. Reverend Rule married a couple that spring who stood like 2 fence rails planted 18 inches apart. He said "cleave" and said it hard enough to make the syllable crack. He drank water after. He did not look at Mercy in the back because she had not come. Magistrate Yerkes retired 2 summers later and left his pencil nubs in a cup on a shelf. The next man to sit in his chair threw them away thinking they were for fire lighting. The man did not know that lead can hold a county's weight. Hester Beam died 3 winters after that with her ledger under her stove slate, and her niece found it and brought it to Dodd, who had learned to open drawers slow and to hold books with 2 hands, as if respect weighs the same as guilt. He set the ledger under the mica again and traced the 3 blanks with his forefinger held above the glass. Dr. Imlay's portfolio went to his son after his death, and his son gave it to the county, because some sons do not keep the father's instruments if the instruments calcify the air in a house. The 4 brass tacks still closed. The margin note still rested like a knuckle mark on the paper. The son did not read it. He let the paper be what it was. Prudence Haldeman outlived most. When she could no longer tie her shawl herself, she slept with the cap in her hands. Her niece untangled the threads and saved what was left of the 7-inch ribbon, which had frayed to 6 3/4. The niece pinned the shorter ribbon to the muslin that had once covered a face and put it in a cedar drawer that smelled like winter apples when you opened it. Sheriff Dodd died with his caliper on his desk and his hat on the peg and his drawer locked. Pierce opened the drawer with a key that turned like a stiff knee and found the caliper, holding down a letter he had written to himself that said only, "Make certain of the leaves." Pierce took the caliper in his hand and felt the weight, and put it back on the paper. Time made the county change places. The vault door stuck. The canvas frayed. The mica clouded. The maps yellowed along the edges where hands hold paper. The label that said "Births, 1870" fell off and lay between drawers, and the rodent that lives in courthouses chewed the sharpened tip of the letter Y and left the rest. A volunteer came to the courthouse to make order of paper. She brought a camera that took pictures of pages one after another and turned them into long ribbons of dark and light. She wrote on a log, "Family Bible leaves, frames 203, 219, petition, frame 220, ledger copy, frame 281, plate margin, frame 222. She cranked and watched the letters flick under glass. In the microfilm, the torn edges do not bleed. They look clean as if pain were neat. The volunteer held her breath, and she did not know why, until the margin came where the words lay tight, the phrase "consanguinity within the 2nd degree," like a rail laid silver across black. She turned again and saw the plate with its tidy circle head and straight fall from brow to lip and the penciled line, malformation consistent with close kin. She set her hand on the desk and felt the desk feel like a body. If we close what we can close, we close this. A woman, Mercy Wyant, delivered in a farmhouse off Brush Valley Road. A brother, Orrin, stood in a kitchen where the family Bible had lost 17 leaves. A midwife's ledger held 3 blanks. A doctor's plate carried a margin note that did not flinch. A magistrate wrote consanguinity within the 2nd degree and sealed a petition. A clerk opened a vault and set paper on green felt. A cap ribbon measured 7 inches and went missing and then came back frayed. And an 11-mile road ran between a table with a muslin square and a door with a lock that never quite fit. If everyone who set eyes on those 3 blanks knew what they meant, why did no one step forward to fill them before the child needed a cap to hide his face? If men could speak 2nd degree out loud in a court, why did the rest of us whisper in kitchens and walk 11 miles with our heads down? The volunteer turned the crank to check one frame twice, and the light bloomed and then dimmed, dust floating like seeds, and in the gray at the edge of the doctor's plate a faint curve caught, no more than a soft arc in the film's grain echo, of a jawline rising and falling under a painted plane, while a green label at the reel's end clicked into place with one word on it that makes all the rest heavier. Filed.